Hello everybody, this is Adrienne with Essential Coaching. So today is August the 23rd, 2023, and I have had two videos taken down off of TikTok because I talked about the Maui fires. They said that I broke the community rules and guidelines, and because I gave an opinion about what I thought based on what the fire chief and the emergency management services director, as well as the governor of Hawaii, said things out of their own mouth, and I only gave an interpretation of which was actually what they said. But that's okay. That's okay. I wanted to get back to you all, let you know what's happening. Is that they are censoring a lot of people on different platforms now for even talking about, even hinting, or even having a suggestion that what happened in Maui could have been, I don't know, ordered, planned. But unfortunately, we have to look at things with the validity of what's happening, and stop putting our head in the sand and thinking that this didn't happen. And then people, when they start to censor us, you need to start wondering why, because you can't have an opinion based on the facts. There's a problem. So I did do my research, and I do want to get back to you all about that, about the expanding powers of the governors that has happened, especially in the state of Virginia and other states. So I'm going to read this thing to you, okay? It's about the legislative oversight of emergency executive powers. So, in times of war, disease, or other extraordinary conditions, each state authorizes its governor to declare a state of emergency. And once an emergency has been declared, executive powers expand until the emergency ends. Now, although governors need to be able to respond to emergencies quickly, vary between states. However, some common features exist, and this is statutes defining executive order during an emergency cannot be modified by executive order. As a result, legislators have the authority to legislate firm limits on emergency executive powers, and legislatures may retain the power to nullify an emergency proclamation by resolution. In most cases, it takes a simple majority vote of both chambers. So if you have a legislature in your state, and you should, or assembly, they should be able to pull back the reins of a governor's authority for doing emergency situation. This is the executive powers for the state of Hawaii. It says, I guess it's revision stat 127A-14. This is, I'm going to read it to you. It says, the governor or mayor shall be the sole judge of the existence of the danger, threat, or circumstances giving rise to declaration of a state of emergency in the state or a local emergency in the county as applicable to Hawaii law. So if you go to www.capital.hawaii.gov, you'll see that particular law or legislature. So state of Hawaii, their governor enacted the state of emergency back in July, but it was supposed to be, if you go back and read the proclamation, it's supposed to end it July 31st because the threat was over. Then you had this new thing coming with the fire, and then he ordered another proclamation of state of emergency for that. But he made a lot of changes prior to the fire in August that changed a lot of the laws, and one was the suspension of certain laws, especially pertaining to cultural and historical sites. Yeah, he did. And so if you know anything about Lahaina or Maui, that part of Maui that burned down, it was a historical location. So technically it's saying that he can make any decision he wants over that land because he suspended any protection over the historical cultural lands at that time, and it's not been rescinded. So, and I think the emergency is over when he says it's over, and if he wants to extend the state of emergency, which he probably will because it was an extensive fire. People can't come back and they can't build, they can't do what they want to do with that land until he says so, unless the state legislature pulls him back and says you need to end the state of emergency or amend what your state of emergency so these lands can be rebuilt by the people. So this is let people know you can deal with your legislature in your state if you feel like your governor has overstepped his bounds. Although they have given him a lot of power, these governors a lot of power to make these decisions. So this one is involving the state of Virginia. So I'm going to show you to you. Virginia Code 44-146-17, which it deals with the governor's authority for emergencies. Okay, his authority expanded, increasing powers over state of emergencies. And I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to point out some items that you might need to know. So let's look at this. Now, this was signed in law in July of 2023. Okay. To proclaim and publish such rules and regulations and to issue such orders as may, in his judgment, be necessary to accomplish the purposes of this chapter, including but not limited to such measures as are in his judgment and required to control, restrict, allocate, or regulate the use, sale, production, or distribution of food, fuel, clothing, and other commodities, materials, goods, services, resources, blah, 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 blah. Okay? The part that I want to point you to here is that it says, in such executive orders declaring a state emergency may address exceptional circumstances that exist relating to an order of quarantine or an order of isolation concerning a communicable disease, a public health threat that is issued by the state health commissioner for an affected area in the Commonwealth pursuant to Article 3.02, which is 32.148.05 of Chapter 2 of Title 32.1. So my issue with this is that the governor of the state of Virginia can decide to put you in quarantine or isolation for at least 45 days if he so chooses to during a state of emergency. And if you break this rule, it says the force and effect of law and the violation thereof shall be punishable as a class 1 misdemeanor in every case where the executive order declares the violation shall have such force and effect. So people are saying that the governor cannot quarantine you and put you in isolation or wrong, especially in the state of Virginia, because now it has been placed into law that he has the authority to do so. And the state legislation has an opportunity within 45 days of that established that order to fight it and say, hey, we don't want you to go beyond the 45 days. If they do not act within the 45 days and address the situation with the governor, they can't stop it. So now, there was a study done in March of this year, 2023, which said that the journal said there was emergency management highlight shifts in state and territorial emergency powers since the COVID-19 pandemic. And it says that there was a huge controversy in the states' governors taking over responsibility or expanding their power of authority over state of emergencies and how they used it in the COVID pandemic. The extended use of these powers to address the COVID-19 emergency was highly controversial, and during the 2020 and 2021 state territorial legislative sessions, there were efforts to limit governors and state health officials' emergency powers. And this paper includes a formal list of all the dates that each state went into effect of using the emergency powers for the governors regarding COVID-19. And did you know that there's still 3 states, and this is August of 2023, that there are 3 states that are still under the COVID state of emergency, and one of them is Texas. Now, back when COVID was just becoming very rampant, and there was an article done in March of 2020, which is just when people were starting to understand what COVID was. The Heritage Foundation wrote an article called The Constitutional Guide to Emergency Powers. And it talks about the key takeaways. I talked about the key takeaways from this. Depending on epidemic's progress, even more draconian measures may be needed, such as restriction on interstate and interstate travel. The government has ample constitutional and legal authority to impose such emergency steps. And 3, containing the COVID-19 epidemic will require citizen states, private companies, and the federal government to work together. Now, in this article, it says that the Constitution, which is Justice John Marshall Harlan wrote for a 7-2 majority, does not import an absolute right in each person to be at all times and in all circumstances wholly freed from restraint. Instead, a community has the right to protect itself against the epidemic. Its members may, at times, under pressure of great dangers, be subjected to such restraint to be enforced by reasonable regulations as the safety of the general public may demand. Generally prohibits the use of U.S. armed forces for performing domestic law enforcement activities and features criminal penalties for noncompliance. But lawmakers have enacted important exceptions that allow the use in certain specified circumstances of the military to enforce federal laws. One is the Insurrection Act, okay? Originally dated in 1807, which allows the president to use the military when dealing with domestic rebellions. Widespread non-compliance with federal quarantines and travel bans promulgated under the Public Health Service Act may qualify as an insurrection. So they've got y'all covered. So they're saying if we don't comply to these things, there's a possibility that we can be arrested and held against our will and charged with insurrection. What does that tell you? That means they're trying to say you don't have any rights. You can't do anything that you want because they will bring in the military. And that's why a lot of people are afraid to speak up and do anything, because they think, well, if I do this, they'll just bring the military, and then they'll kill us or they'll arrest us or whatever. Or they'll cause a lot of havoc in our lives. So I think a lot of people need to be aware of that. But you have to go back to what they did in the Civil War, and you have to go back and look at what they did in the Revolutionary War and some of the other wars that, yes, they took a chance, but they had to do what was right. I'm not saying what you have to do. I'm just saying that's what those people made in those decisions and those situations they were in. They had to look at the long run and say, do we want to continue under this tyranny, or do we want to change the way our government is run? That's just saying. So understand what they're going to push at you. Understand what they're going to tell your job, and they're going to tell your neighbors, and they're going to tell your churches that you have to follow this law, or else this will happen. Hence, January 6th. I thought it was crazy what January 6th was, and it could have been that it was a setup so that we could see that if you go up against the government, this is what will happen to you. I don't know. Just be mindful of what the rules are. But for every rule, there's a loophole. You just got to read up on it and figure out what it is. But you got to do what's best for you and your family. And just understand if you don't comply with what could happen, and understand what can happen if you do comply. It ain't all good on either side, but you got to figure out what's best for you. But I can tell you this: if you choose not to comply, be prepared. If you choose to comply, be prepared. Because you have to really use discernment right now. What's the best way to go for you? I'm just telling you what I see. You have to go in yourself, and you have to figure out what you need to do. And being complacent and being neutral doesn't help anybody. So you're going to figure out what side of the coin you're going to live on. So, and then, take it from there. Anyway, this is Adrienne. I just wanted to update you all on what's happening in the world from the way I see it. And I will talk to you later. Anyway, y'all have a great night. Blessings.